Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A Muslim life should be much different than a non-Muslim life, because the perfection of guidance is taught to us by the Quran, by the Prophet of Islam, by the holy Imams. Therefore, our behavior, our actions should be better. Unfortunately, in many Muslim countries and Muslim societies, we see that the practice of Islam is much less than when we compare it to what the Quran and what the Hadith expects from us. So in this holy month, the holy month of Ramadan, it is a time where we want to change ourselves. We want to become better. And we want to learn the foundations of an Islamic lifestyle. We said that Tawheed, the oneness of God, is the embodiment of a Muslim's lifestyle. We said that the walayat, the authority of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and belief and attachment to the Ahlul Bayt is a foundation to this Islamic lifestyle. The third thing that we need to work on and we need to focus on is that because we live in a time period where we are encouraged to figure out or to pursue whatever our desires want us to, regardless if it is haram or halal, or if it is a sin or if it's not a sin, we therefore have been a victim of liberalism, meaning that man should be free to pursue whatever he wants. So in such a time period as the month of Ramadan, we actually have to focus on Ubudiyat, which is being a slave of God. It's very interesting that in this month that we are guests of Allah, Allah has given us much more obligations, much more takalif. When Allah loves us, He gives us more things to do. Why? Because that is what a Lord, that is what a Rabb does. A Lord takes you and perfects you and makes you reach completion. That is what the definition, when you look at, for example, Raghib Isfahani, Ar-Rabb fil as at-tarbiya wa huwa insha'u shay halan fa halan ila hadd tamam. That means that Lord, being a Lord comes from tarbiyah or training, and that is changing something from one state to another state until it reaches completion. Our commanding, our powerful Lord, our almighty Lord has commands. Why? So that we can reach perfection, we can become better. Can't you see in the month of Ramadan, when there are more obligations, when there are more commands, when there's more sanctity during this time period, that at the end of the month of Ramadan there is a result? That is what a Rabb does, that is what a Lord does. He instructs you, commands you, but you have results at the end. And that is the difference between the Lord that we can say a normal religious person might have, or a normal person has, and what a Muslim, especially follower of the Ahlul Bayt, believes. That his Lord is Allah who created him, sustained him, but has an objective and an aim to make him better with these commands, inshallah. One of the problems when you talk about Ubudiya and you talk about being a slave, Ubudiyat comes from abd, but unfortunately there's been a huge historical oppression and subjugation that has happened to many people inside America and many people outside the world that were just taken as slaves. Why? Only because their color of skin, which is against every teaching, all the teachings of Islam, which is that the one that has value is the one that is the most pious, regardless of their skin color. So because of the history of slavery inside the United States, many religious dominations and many religious groups, when they approach the concept of being a slave, because of the history, and second of all, because of liberalism, they're taught that man should actually pursue his own desires. The translation of this word, not only in Arabic, sometimes it's translated as servant only, but also in Christian texts, some of the scholars that have gone through the languages, the original or the translation of the Bible, they come to the fact that actually the word that should be translated should be slave. And many preachers also come to this conclusion that how can I teach or preach to my congregation about being a slave of God. Once you say that, people are already disliking this word. But the actual definition, the correct definition, maybe 130 times one of the Christian scholars was saying that this word has been used. It should be used as slave, an abd. And if there was a lower word than this, Allah would have used it. Why? We are talking about a slave that does not own anything. A slave is different than a servant. A slave of God is someone that does not own anything. That his will should be the will of his master, his Lord. And that he should try to fulfill and please his master, which is Lord. But this is much different than being, of course, a slave to a human. You're being a slave of God. One who loves you, who is your Rabb, one that is giving you instructions. At the end, you will have great results. And that is when we see in these narrations, for example, from the Prophet of Islam, Misbahu Sharia, Man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabba. Maybe one of the definitions of this statement can be whoever knows himself, whoever gains knowledge of himself, he has gained knowledge of his Lord. Meaning that once we realize we are an abd, once we realize we are owned, then we start to investigate and to have knowledge of who owns us and who is the Lord. Unless you confess and unless you accept the fact that we are owned by God, unless you accept the fact that He has created us, how the Quran says, مَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that the purpose of creation is worship. And inside worship, the word is abd, which is to be a slave, to worship God, to be a slave of Him. You will not understand who your Lord is. Your nafs will become, your desires will become your own Lord. So the month of Ramadan is a month of putting away these desires and actually changing our desires to make our desires, our lower desires, our carnal desires, changing them to heavenly desires, changing them desires that we want to do good, changing them to desires that we always want to help people. We like to assist people. I've seen many, some different groups that they are assisting the old people in their mosque and congregations, that because it's very dangerous for them, or it might be dangerous for them to shop during this virus, that they are assisting them and doing their shopping for them. That this is actually one of the desires that God really likes, to being compassionate. Irham turham. If you have mercy towards God's creation, you will have mercy towards you. So changing our will into heavenly wills and not only thinking about our slaves, that is what an abd does. But of course, an abd of Allah, someone that submits to God, as we read in the traditions, is one of the greatest prizes, or one of the greatest rewards or accomplishments that we can have. Look at this tradition from Imam Ali alayhi salam from Kanzul Fawaid. Ilahi kafa bi izzan an akuna laka abdan. Sufficient for me in terms of honor, the most honorable thing, sufficient for me in honor is to be your slave. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, with his status, with his position, he says, sufficient for honor of me is that I am your slave. Or recite about the Prophet of Islam that he is your slave and that he is your messenger. So the fact that the Ahlul Bayt, or such great figures in the history of Islam or the world, unparalleled figures, timeless figures, are so great is their connection to God. And what kind of connection? What kind of relationship? A relationship between a slave and their master. And that is the relationship we're trying to upbring inside ourselves. That is the relationship we're trying to present when we recite the dua, when we recite supplication. Because when you do dua to God, you're acknowledging the fact that you are not possessing any capability to remove your problems, that all the problems will be resolved by Allah. He is all-powerful. He is the Lord. You are the slave. You are humble. You are dhalil, according to and attributed to God. So inshallah, in this month of Ramadan, we will inshallah increase our ubudiyat, being a slave of Allah, and this is one of the most important features and principles of our Islamic life, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.